these cults move into this claiming to be objective and saying, we see it all this way, and this is good, and this is evil. And if you don't follow the rules, you're definitely evil. And if you do follow the rules, you're good. And it's just not the way the world really is. But it's very hard to see it when you're in it because it sounds great and it sounds like a system that you could follow, but you're basically being sold a shortcut. And you're not being told that the rationale for these shortcuts is usually a sociopathic narcissist deciding what those rules are. So probably not the best person to emulate.
Hello, everybody. John Asack, you know me, and my great friend, Hoyt Richards. Hi, Hoyt.
Good to see you, John.
Yeah, it is. It's always such a pleasure. And it's been too long because we've had other things going on.
It has been a minute. I know.
Yeah.
Life happens sometimes.
Yeah, and lots of it.
Yes.
You know, quite often. I usually find it's happening all around me, in fact, whether I like it or not. And yes, anyway, you pointed out this documentary called Breath of Fire, which is on HBO.
Yeah.
Or Sky over here.
Okay, good. Yeah.
And it starts with a woman who calls herself Guru Jagat.
Yes.
With a tea towel on her head,
yes.
saying, reality is a trance. Your reality is a trance of your own making or someone else's making. And if you can hypnotize yourself, then no one can ever hypnotize you. That's power. That's sovereignty. And these are interesting statements. And
yes.
You know, I would aver that if you can hypnotize yourself, then you know how to hypnotize yourself. That's all you know. Until you know how it works,
right,
then other people will be doing it. And she was just, I thought she was brilliant, you know, the charismatic sort of thing. So yeah, talk us into it a little bit.
It's a really interesting doc. It's got some flaws. I mean, I think, you know, like most of the docs, they tend to lean in too heavy to the cult, you know, leader, so to speak. You know, they kind of make that the focus more than I would personally like. That, you know, but they do a good job of humanizing the survivors. The survivors have some great things to say, and I just thought that I would have liked to lean more into that direction. You know, I think the survivors really, and we talk about this all the time, and I think this has always been the flaw in a lot of these cult docs is the temptation, the low-hanging fruit is always the cult leader and what the charismatic narcissist and what are they doing and how many lives are they fucking up and what kind of carnage is left over and all these sort of things.
How many Rolls Royces have they got?
Yes, exactly. All of these things. And you know, that is part of the story, but you'll learn about that story by talking to the people who lived through it with them. You know, you don't have to focus as much on the cult leader from the point of view that I don't know how much a viewer will identify with a sociopath, you know, and so it's like, do you really want to make that the primary focus of the story? So that would be my argument. But having said that, there were a lot of good things I liked about it. And it's a fascinating story. And for anyone who, like myself, has drank yogi tea, this is yogi. It's about Yogi Bhajan, who created that business and multi-million-dollar businesses along the way, and was certainly not a very good person and basically a scam artist in many levels. And it's a really interesting kind of breakdown of his whole story. And then the woman that you just referenced was kind of one of the underlings that became a follower and kind of rose up in the ranks. And that's kind of the thing I wanted to kind of address today was one of the guys who, and I can't remember his name, but he gets interviewed throughout the doc series. And he's kind of, I guess, falls in the category of being an expert of some sort. But he draws some great, interesting points. And one of the ones that really resonated with me was, and I wrote it down. He said, I think it's ironic that the people that seem to have learned the most from Yogi Bhajan, who saw him and his methods most clearly, are the criminals and the con artists and the frauds. They're the ones that really saw what he was doing and took notes. And I thought that really hit me so hard because I certainly know in my experience, in my group, there were certain people that rose up within the ranks. And from my point of view, I never quite understood how the dynamics that played. The way I always framed it to others was what you were being asked to do within the group was if you develop tyrannical qualities within yourself, you would kind of be able to move up, because that's kind of how people who ran the cult behaved. And if you didn't really have that within you, you suffered because you couldn't really move up in that way. And I think the point that this gentleman was making is really interesting, that if you're one of the kind of true believers, which I was for many years, trying to follow the ideas and the kind of pitch that I had bought into with, our group, that we're here to become more enlightened, help our fellow man, help the planet, become a better citizen, become a better person, all these sort of things, which sounds great. That's not actually what was going on. And if you don't really have those kind of, for lack of a better description, more criminal elements within your personality, you're not going to readily see those are the things that are really happening. But the people that do have those tendencies recognize it and start to say, oh, that's how it works. Now I get it. Let me mirror that behavior. And of course, if you do, you will rise up in the organization. I thought that's a fascinating way to look at it. Like, for the people like myself who always wanted to kind of be a leader and kind of inspire others, because I've always had people that affected me in my life that way and couldn't really do it within the group. Now it makes more sense to me, thankfully, why I didn't. Because luckily I'm not wired that way. And it took me a long time to really accept that's what was happening, and then recognize really what was happening and why I didn't belong, and to finally escape and leave. And now looking back on it, I thought this was an interesting point that we could talk about. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, John.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And there are a couple of things in there. I mean, I think it's very well made, because you see a vast array of people from, there are, I think, 3 of the original followers of Yogi Bhajaj.
Yeah.
Who were with him in the 60s. And of course, there's that famous moment at Woodstock where the guy does the Kundalini Yoga thing. You see it in the movie, and he's got 200,000 people. And he is a disciple of Yogi Bhajaj and teaching the principle of Kundalini, which I was quite interested that in the first hour that there wasn't an explanation of what Kundalini is, the serpent in the spine, the energy that will release through the crown chakra, all of that kind of stuff. But never mind. But there was an expert in there who said that of Guru Jagat that she is a photocopy of a counterfeit, because and they've got Sikhs in there saying he's not a Sikh. This isn't a traditional Sikh practice. It's all made up. And what it actually looks like, the clips we see, is high-speed yoga, that you're doing the asanas way too quickly. And in doing that, you're hyperventilating. The major technique that Rajneesh used to get people to go, hoo, and get dizzy.
And you have a heightened experience, right?
Yeah, you get, well, exactly. It's like when you're a kid, you like being twirled round and round because it makes you dizzy.
Right.
It's exactly that feeling. And what's happening is that you're getting too much oxygen in your blood. So you're having a physiological experience, which is palmed off as a transcendental experience, which is the case with all of these groups, sadly with many religious groups, that they
which Yuval talks about. Yuval Laura talks about all the time. Yeah, the awe experience, right?
Yeah. So you're inducing what people feel as a peak experience, which is the term I used before I met Yuval. And it's a fake peak experience because it's physiological, staring at something for long enough, chanting a word over and over again, banging a rhythm out, dancing in rhythm. There are lots of things we do.
Speaking in tongues, one of those things.
They put us into an altered state, a different state of mind. I did a review of these things. I did a chapter for, what was the book called? Psychiatry and Eastern Religion and Spirituality. And Steve Hassan and I did a chapter together. And the first time I got a chance to say, oh, you've got davening, rocking backwards and forwards. You've got drumming, you've got mantra chanting. These things, fasting, of course, sleep deprivation. There are a series of techniques. And when you list them down, you go, and people really believe they heard the voice of God or this thing happen because they were out of their minds with
exactly
hunger or what have you. And I thought there was, and this is a spoiler, I'm sorry, but I've got to say it, that somebody worked out, Yogi Bhajaj died in 2004, and Guru Jagat pronounced herself his replacement 8 years later, saying that he'd told her. And then it traces back and you find out that she'd been a con artist for quite some time, doing online astrology and stuff like this.
Astrology, exactly.
Yeah, but the confidence with which she presents herself. Now, what you say about people going through the system and learning what to do, Scientology, Darfried John, Paul Twitchell's Eckankar, Werner Erhard Est, Chuck Berner's Enlightenment Intensive. A friend of mine did most of the work, but in the early 90s, we traced 200 gurus who had studied Scientology. You've got things like reevaluation co-counseling, Harvey Jackins, which the Open University here used for 20 years. And I went to them saying, it's Dianetics. And they'd just give it to their students to do remotely. Say, oh, you just read this and do this thing to each other. And it's like, you don't get untrained people doing counseling, right? Let's just start from that point of view. Because if something goes wrong, and it was only when Jackins, there were allegations of sexual abuse on his part, that the Open University suddenly decided that the method didn't work.
Oh, boy.
And that's gone into, particularly through Werner Erhard, Rosenberg, that's gone into corporations, universities. I mean, I've had a couple of conversations with Ann Peterson, who defected from the Forum Landmark Est Trust. And she worked closely with Erhard in this century after his comeback. And so she got to know this intemperate, alcoholic bully very well. And she always got on well with him because she wouldn't join his personal staff. But she was delivering courses to hundreds of academics. So it's crept in. You've got team building exercises, all sorts of things, which exactly as you say, somebody goes through one of these systems and they realize how they can make money and control people by using these techniques. And so it just proliferates with photocopies of counterfeits. That there is no actual enlightenment, no actual compassion, no humility, nothing of any great value to mankind that's coming out of these things. Just people with towels on their heads.
Yeah, and I think what's so fascinating about it is, as the person that doesn't have those proclivities and doesn't have those tendencies, obviously the thing that you bought into, which is of course kind of, we've discussed many times over the years, the bait and switch, these great ideas you buy into, how these groups weaponize your more noble side, and appeal to those aspects of wanting to be the better person and then living an upright life and becoming enlightened and doing things, in accordance with spiritual ideas and all those sort of things would sound great. So once you've bought into that sort of thing, you're constantly projecting that onto everything you're experiencing, because that's what the premise is. I bought into this. It kind of goes into Cialdini's thing, the law of consistency. You bought into that belief system. So now you have to project that belief system onto what's happening to try to make sense of why you're staying there. It's one of the things we've talked about over the years. Why do you stay, right? Because you want to believe this is what you're involved with. And often it's a disconnect because it doesn't line up very well. And then you get punished if you question that too much, and it becomes a really crazy format. But the alternative side, which I really had not thought about until I saw this doc and had that mentioned, for those who aren't thinking that way, who are more kind of devious and understand deception, and kind of that's more their go-to tendencies. They pick up on really what's happening, which it took me 20 years to figure out. And they start to recognize, oh, I can actually take advantage of this system. I can see how, like you said, how that can lead to an opportunity to control people, maybe make money, certainly experience some form of power. And they're the ones that really catch on much more quickly, and therefore they can move up in the organization.
I published a piece at Tony Ortega's Underground Bunker way back in about 2013 about the training routines that are used in Scientology, where you sit and confront another person and you go through, you bull bait the other person to try and get a reaction, and you go through all these things. And this astute commentator said that when he'd done the training routines, he felt that he was training in sociopathy. And I kind of looked at him and went, he's absolutely right that Scientology as a system is a way of turning you into a narcissistic predator. So that you will be completely selfish. You won't care about anybody else. You've got to get your high from your auditing. And by the time I left Scientology, I knew it was a combination of seekers and salespeople that were attracted to this. People like Werner Erhard, who were honing the skill of selling blue sky, of selling absolutely nothing. I was very pleased that somebody sent me a thing the German government have issued about Scientology, and it's got 10 little bullet points, and one of them, the fifth one, translates as, "This is where they sell you a piece of blue sky." It's like, yes.
Oh, great. Yes. Well done.
Recognition at last. Didn't have my name on it. Should have copyright John Atack. But the idea that even if you didn't start out that way, that one of the things within all of these systems, and it's the first thing I saw when I left, because I'd been made phobic about psychology and psychiatry and psychotherapy. I actually didn't go there first off
Right.
to understand Scientology. I went to animal
Right.
models. I went to zoology. And I
Right.
saw that there were predators, the rogue animals, the animals like tigers male tigers will eat their own young. They don't
Right.
care. It's a tasty meal. It's a nice snack.
Yeah.
Or, rogue elephants, what have you. These are the psychopaths in our society. But you've also got all of the herd dynamics, the domestication element of being human, which I
Right.
don't think we've thought enough about. We're domesticated animals. We're not
Mhm.
herd animals. We
Right.
are actually taught and domesticated from birth to
Yeah.
agree with certain
Yeah.
things.
Socialized, right? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
and not in a good way, if
Mm.
necessarily. Now I look back on my childhood and I am so incredibly grateful that my parents were decent human beings. That my three older brothers, there were some difficult moments occasionally, but they were very smart, and all of my family were people who stood up to bullies
Mm.
right from being children. I can remember stories about two of my brothers going and defending somebody, and I found myself, I've spent a lifetime of that, I suppose. When they do it to me, it's one thing, but if they do it to somebody else, no. And to go, what an incredible gift to have had this safe, lovely place.
Right.
My first wife loved school, and I couldn't understand why anybody loved school. I hated school from the first moment because there were these big people who were bullies, who were called teachers, and they could hit me. They were allowed to hit me if they wanted to. It only happened twice during my school years, but it did happen. And they could shout at you. They could be abusive emotionally and psychologically. And I didn't like it because I came from an environment of learning, an environment
Right.
of information, finding things out, fascination.
Right.
And now we've got somebody looking over your shoulder all the time and telling you what to do. I didn't like it. Kind of like a cult, really, now I come to think
I
about it.
love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of getting you ready to be obedient, some obedience training or OT training going on there. I met people who'd come from good backgrounds, good
Mhm.
families, who'd been drawn into Scientology and become weaponized empaths. I think,
Yeah.
our late friend Mike Rinder
Yeah.
exemplifies that. Mike was a thoroughly decent guy. I got to
Yeah.
know him reasonably well over the last few years of his life.
Yeah.
And yet, our first meeting after the cult, my first interview with him is a conversation with him about how he'd come to destroy me,
Yeah.
in the 1990s. And he
Right.
was, of course you were in the way of Scientology, so you were in the way of progress for humanity. So of course I'd have destroyed you. Now, when I was a Scientologist, that never came up.
Yeah.
I never had the urge to destroy anybody, and I never thought it would
Right.
be a good idea. And it wasn't part of being a customer, what they call public Scientologist. But
Yeah.
Mike had, whoosh, he'd grown up in it from the age of 6. At 18, he's sold into slavery by the Australian Sydney organization. And he didn't know
Wow.
until he gets
Right.
to the ship in
Yeah.
1973. And they say, and he says, when am I starting my management training? They say, you're not doing management training. You've been sold. We've given some courses for you.
Wow.
And so he became an avid Scientologist an experience I just didn't have, luckily for me. And he came back from that to be this good person. So on the one hand, you have the people who are coming in, the con artists, and there were
Yeah.
loads of them in Scientology. The people I met who would
Yeah.
boast about how, I remember this guy, I worked with him briefly as a decorator, and after I'd stopped working with him, he came and boasted. We would normally at that time, to give you a price kind of range, we'd decorate a room for £30, right?
Right.
And he'd
Okay.
got this old lady and he'd got her signing up for more and more stuff. And he got the bill up to £900, 30
Wow.
times what would normally
Wow.
charge. And he was laughing about her kids coming to him and threatening him and him saying, she signed a contract, she has to pay. And he was pleased with himself. There was another guy, he was putting spray cladding on the outside of houses. My wife worked for him, my first wife to be, worked for him briefly. And he get a lifetime guarantee. And a year after the stuff was sprayed on, it fell off.
Mm.
And I heard about his ethics interview in Scientology. He went in, he said, what do I do? I've given all the money to Scientology, hundreds of thousands of pounds had gone. And the ethics officer, and Scientology claimed to be the most ethical people on the planet, said, leave
Yeah.
the country.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, I mean, what's so interesting about it, and I can look within my own group, like that type of behavior, that kind of like as I said, the tyrannical or the very dominant, abuse
Predatory,
of
predatory.
predatory. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It is given positive reinforcement within the group that that we actually had a statement like, oh, that person's doing it. They're doing it now because that when they were able to exhibit those patterns and be able to basically tear someone an asshole in front of them and rip them to shreds psychologically and verbally abuse them, that was someone doing it. And it's so interesting looking back on it, how you're basically trying to build a team of destructive kind of criminal minded people who under the guise of this spiritual approach. Like it's the antithesis of what you signed up for. But the thing that's being subtly reinforced throughout the group is, oh, this is what it means to be that. I guess when you said earlier, like the domesticated versus the herd, I always try to look at these type of things as spectrums, like the spectrum of being domesticated, of, we're trying to be socialized, you're trying to become the golden rule, trying to do unto others as you wish they would do unto you, those sort of things. Those are the things that allow us to kind of have a cohesive society in some way. But then you also have the herd mentality, which is much more of a instinctive survival of the fittest type thing. And within that, if you lean heavily into the survival of the fittest, it's like the strongest only survive. So you're going to become quite lethal. And so I think those are some interesting dynamics that are kind of coming at each other. And these cults find a way to exploit both sides of it in the sense, the people that really have those really strong tyrannical qualities are the ones that are going to be able to mirror a lot of the behavior of the cult leader, because that's kind of the personality type that they are. And it's so interesting having had this experience of thinking you're signing up for something and being a part of this group that's going to be this spiritual experience. And it's really a sociopath leading a group and trying to create followers who will emulate them and verify their crazy, fucked up behavior and paint it as being something spiritual. It's really, I mean, it's such a wild dynamic to try to explain to people. I don't know if I'm doing a very good job of it here, but it's a
Pretty good
crazy
so far.
experience. It's a crazy experience, to live through and try to relate to other people. But I think what this expert said is really helpful to me, that if you have those tendencies, or if you've learned those tendencies, or you grew up in an environment where those tendencies, whether your family or background, put you in touch with, those are the, like if you grew up in, I'm sure in the ghetto where, it is very much survival of the fittest, and very much that sort of stuff, then you're going to have to learn certain things to survive that will probably have to take advantage of others. And so that those type of people can come into an organization like I was involved with, or certainly Scientology, and recognize those techniques are being displayed to some degree, and they can take advantage because they understand how that works.
Yeah,
Whereas,
it fits their temperament. Or where I was going with the zoological argument was that I realized that Scientology was a way of taming people. And if you couldn't tame them gently, you broke them, which is the rehabilitation project
yeah,
force. Because I was treated as a celebrity because I was an artist, even though I didn't have any
right,
money.
right,
I never came anywhere near the abusive treatment.
right,
And I don't think I've met anybody, and I've met more than 1,000 people who've been in Scientology over the years. I don't think I've met anybody who wasn't abused. Even Leah Remini, who was a genuine celebrity, some of the things she describes, her mum sort of gave her to them when she was 13 and she went and
right,
worked
right. Of
there.
course.
But that process, so you get somebody who is a malignant narcissist and they come in and go, oh, some new ways of
Yeah,
improving my bank balance. And I really did see that. I had a friend who was an artist and he's a lovely bloke. I'm not going to name him for that reason. And he was doing reasonably well. And after I left Scientology, he came to me and he left. We talked about what had happened and he went, this is appalling. Don't want to be involved. He'd been involved for longer than I had. And
right,
I saw him about a couple of years later and he talked to me, which was weird because he'd gone back in and they're not allowed to talk to me. Come on.
right, right.
I am a social personality and you can't have an SP. You can't have people talking to social personalities. But he stopped me. We were in the supermarket in East Grinstead and he came up and said, oh, how are you doing, John? And all this. Oh, really good to see you. And he then quietly said, all of my business was based on selling paintings to Scientologists.
Right.
Everything collapsed when I left. So I've gone back in. I've done OT8, the highest level. It's complete rubbish,
Oh
but
boy.
I'm still making a good living. By
Yeah.
now, he ought to be retired, hopefully. So I hope I haven't damaged his business in any way. So getting into the becoming part of this society that this is how you live. And it can be that your nature is defective. Hubbard had this thing where in the early 70s, with the people who were aboard ship with him, the Sea organization, they were put on the little lie detector, and he did call it a lie detector. Scientologists told me I shouldn't say that the e-meter is a lie detector, but I've got two places where he called it a lie detector. And he also taught about how to interrogate people after riots, or what he called riots, after the Sharpeville massacre. In fact, he wanted the South African authorities to interrogate those who hadn't been shot dead,
Wow.
the unarmed people who hadn't been shot dead, as rioters. How dare they come and burn their identity cards, you know? But nonetheless, they'll put you on the e-meter and find out. And in
Yeah. Find out the truth. Yeah,
and
right.
in this case, what people were asked, and this is not thought about enough, is were they soldiers of light or soldiers of darkness? Now, this is the old Gnostic Marcionite myth, which
Right.
comes from Zoroastrianism, the ancient Iranian religion, where the universe is seen as a battle between good and evil. It's something
Right.
you find very much in Christianity,
Sure.
God and the devil. It doesn't really exist in Judaism, you know, where Satan barely appears. And when he does, he's
Right.
sitting and having a cup of tea with God in the book of Job and go, well, inflict some boils on him and see if he still loves you. He's not very nice, Satan. But the devils and demons and all of this warfare
And,
in Christianity is very big. And Hubbard wanted to know which was which in their past lives, their many incarnations over the trillions of years, were
right.
they good or evil? And the interesting thing was he promoted the ones who were evil and demoted the ones who were good. So
Yeah.
there was a guy whose nickname was Berserksky, Alex Sibersky, because he was vicious. There was another guy called
Yeah.
Beren Berez, and there's a picture of somebody being thrown overboard from one of Hubbard's ships. And this grinning man is Beren Berez, who's really enjoying himself and has a very florid moustache. With a picture credit to L. Ron Hubbard for anybody who doesn't think that Hubbard knew that they were throwing people into the sewage in the harbour in Corfu from
Oh,
a
geez.
great height, 25 to 40 feet. So the people that were malignant, curiously, there was another cult where this happened, where it had a lot more significance in the world. And that cult was the Conservative and Unionist Party of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, known
Oh,
as the Tories, known as the Conservatives, under a woman called Margaret Thatcher, who proved that the world is a much gentler and better place if women are in charge, as we all knew. The
mm,
first day of her prime ministership in 1979, Margaret Thatcher put a copy of The Road to Serfdom by von
right.
Hayek on the cabinet desk and said, this will be our Bible. And the idea, von Hayek's idea, and there are many people who believe this, is we're all sociopaths. Nobody does anything that isn't for their own self-interest,
Mm,
self-gratification or glorification. So the cult known as Great Britain, the Union of
yeah.
Great Britain and Northern Ireland, civil servants were allegedly given this test, which said, are you here to make a position for yourself or are you here to help people? And anybody who
Right.
said they were there to help people, down. Anybody, sons, soldiers of darkness, soldiers of
Right.
light. Reagan did something similar. And we've seen this incredible change in the world that is, you know, everything is about ticking boxes and making sure you do things properly rather than caring for people. So
Yeah.
that our social service systems have collapsed under paperwork, mountains of paperwork, and people not really being helped. I had an amazing experience. I was in Washington, D.C. It was 1988, and this cab driver was driving me to the Smithsonian, in fact, which was great. And he was from Ghana. And I said, how long have you been here? He said, I've been here for 9 years. I said, what's the main difference between being in the US and being in Ghana? And he said, in Ghana, where I lived, if anything went wrong in your life, the whole village was there to help you. Here, they have welfare.
Oh, God. Right.
Made
Oh,
me
my.
really made me think. It was like, yeah, we need to change the way we think about things a little
Well,
bit.
yeah, and I think that's the biggest issue that you see with any cultic group, and you see, and we talk about it as well, many times about the cultist society we live in,
Mm,
and it's falling into that binary. way of thinking, the all or nothing,
Yeah.
good and evil, right and wrong, I mean,
Republican and Democrat.
yeah, exactly. And it's only when, because a lot of times, even when you're talking, oh, is this person good or evil? I mean, what you're ultimately talking about, if you would at least pull back a little bit, is behavior. Are they behaving in a way that you agree with or you don't agree with, so
Yeah.
to speak?
Do I like it or not? Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So,
what are
so
the
yeah,
consequences?
to say someone is just evil as if every act they do somehow falls in this category of being something, demonic is not even realistic.
Mm.
Even just by the law of averages, 50% maybe, you might do something that once in a while that might be considered from another person's point of view, something good.
Mm.
And so it's a ludicrous way to kind of look at the world other than through your own personal, very subjective lens. I mean, that's one of the things that really realize like these cultic groups and even religions fall into this idea that one size fits all. Someone's going to come up with an idea that just works for everybody, and once you all know that agree upon all these ideas that work for everybody, then we just have to do that and then we're being good. And it's like that's just not the way the world operates. I mean, it's very important for me, like even like the current situation with all the wars going on right now. It's like, listen, I don't have enough interest in these things or enough knowledge to know the history behind it all. Now I can look at people throwing bombs at each other and say, I don't want to be part of that sort of idea. That sounds horrible, people doing destruction to each other. But ultimately, it only serves me from the point of view that if I was in the position of power, which I'm definitely not, I may not be also on board with that. But again, I don't have the information they have. I don't know any of it, but it allows me to somehow look at something and make a decision based on my own very personal lens of like, I would like to emulate that behavior, or given the choice, I would maybe not like to do what I see happening. And that allows me to build some form of a moral compass that allows me to hopefully make a way through life, by just analyzing things from my very personal subjective point of view. But these cults move into this claiming to be objective and saying, we see it all this way, and this is good, and this is evil. And if you don't follow the rules, you're definitely evil. And if you do follow the rules, you're good. And it's just not the way the world really is. But it's very hard to see it when you're in it because it sounds great and it sounds like a system that you could follow, but you're basically being sold a shortcut and you're not being told that the rationale for these shortcuts is usually someone who's usually in a position of a sociopathic narcissist deciding what those rules are, and so probably not the best person to emulate. So
No.
it's a really fascinating thing that as I get older, the more I see of it, and I'm like, listen, at the end of the day, all I can do is try to figure out what works for me and try to be consistent as best I can and be open-minded that even something I feel like makes sense to me at one point might not actually be accurate because as I take in more information, there might be a nuance that might make me say, oh, actually, there's a better way to look at that,
Mm.
or just might be flat out wrong from a certain perspective. So I just think we have to really consider ourselves as work in progress, as kind of trying to make our way through life and not fall into this trap of thinking, oh, I'm just going to be a good person and I'm not going to be a bad person. Life's too complicated. I mean, we're flawed individuals, and we'll constantly do things that when we look back, we'll think, well, that maybe wasn't the smartest thing to do, but I still learned from it. I wish I could have done more of this in the past and I didn't, so I have some regrets there, but I learned from it. I think if we just continue to learn, then we're probably in a better place than trying to be the good person, the right person, or don't be evil. It's like I just think it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, a fundamental deception that we find in such groups is if you just do exactly as you're told, you'll be able to think for yourself. And in
Oh,
Scientology, it's, if you do
wow.
Scientology, you'll be self-determined
Right.
as long as you agree, and you have to agree exactly with whatever Ron Hubbard says. And as
Wow.
Ron Hubbard, as with all of these gurus that I've studied, contradicted himself frequently, it's very hard
Yeah.
to know what you're
Yeah.
meant to be doing. And then you get the kind of, well, which are the important rules? If you've lived a lifetime of not eating pork or shellfish, does that
Right.
mean you're going to go to heaven? Is it more important that you've been kind?
Yeah.
Or if you
Right.
wear leather, whoa,
Yeah.
leather, if you're not vegan, if you're not this, if
Right.
you're not that. Isaiah Berlin said the only thing we should be intolerant of is intolerance. And adding up what good and evil are, I mean, that's way beyond my little human mind. I don't know what,
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
know,
Based
the,
on what? Right. Yeah. Based on what? Yeah.
yeah, if I don't know what the future holds. So you have Chuang Tzu's famous story about the horse that turns up. And it starts with the horse runs away, and the farmer's neighbors come and say, "Oh, that's terrible." And he says, "Well, who knows?" And then the horse comes back and brings a herd of horses with it. And so the
Mm.
neighbors come and say, "Oh, what good fortune." He says, "Well, maybe." And then his son falls off one of the horses and breaks his leg. "Oh, poor you." "Well, we don't know." Then the army come recruiting and they don't take his son. And to me, that is essential wisdom. I mean, Chuang Tzu is essential wisdom. The
Right.
seven inner chapters of Chuang Tzu are vital reading for everybody, I think. Though there is one of them that makes no sense to me. That can happen. But how do we know? Milarepa, the Tibetan yogin, said that when he was studying with his master, one of the other neophytes, acolytes, said, "I'm going to go into the village and do some good work for my karma." And the teacher said, "Until you're enlightened, you can't know the consequences of your actions. So you can't know whether what you do is good." And
Right.
then you get those social inversions, like the idea that Mother Teresa was a good person. She's been
Yeah.
sanctified by the Catholic Church. And then
Right.
you read accounts from the nuns who worked with her, and how they used the discipline, the knotted cord, thwacking their thighs until they had orgasms,
Oh
sat
my
in the
God.
cubicles, or how she refused to give painkillers to the dying people that she took in until they'd accepted God. And you're kind of
Wow.
going, this is what's called a saintly narcissist. This is, we have to be a bit careful about how we do
Yeah.
things. We also have to, I couldn't agree more. We we get new information, and sometimes what we considered to be true is not. So my voyage into zoology to understand cult behavior was great. I read Eugene Marais, the
Mm.
first scientific zoologist, The Soul of the Ape, The Soul of the White
Right.
Ant. It wasn't an ape, it was a monkey. It wasn't an ant, it was a termite. But putting that aside, he was the first person to scientifically pick up where Aristotle had left it and go, what are these creatures actually doing? How are they
Yeah.
behaving? And then I read all of this stuff about chimps and bonobos, and it's like, oh, we're 1.7% genetically different from these animals. So either we are going to kill it or screw it. Those are the two behaviors of these
Right.
animals, and we're the third chimpanzee, so that's what we're going to do. And through the
Um,
90s, that seemed sensible to me. And then through our friend Yuval Laor,
yeah.
I encountered the work of his mentor, Eva Jablonka, at Tel Aviv
Mm.
University. And you find out that, yes, you've got natural selection, random mutation through natural selection. You've got what is now being called social selection, what used to be called sexual selection, where the female bird will pick the male bird with the longest tail. And there are experiments that show this is true.
Oh, wow.
And chasing tail. But it's the girls that do it, not the men, birds. So that's social selection. So there's a particular thing is, big ears are considered beautiful. And so there'll be a selection towards big ears through social selection. Then you've got epigenetics, which is the thing that kind of undid the Dawkins-Mendel simplistic
Mm.
replication of genes, selfish genes. It's nonsense. Genes are changing all the time. And epigenetics, they're changing in you every moment through epigenetic
Right.
expression.
Right.
Wow, fantastic. Then you
Yeah.
get the fourth part of it, which is the bit that makes chimps and bonobos irrelevant. And that's cultural transmission, the fourth
Mm.
dimension of evolution. Because we have language, we can pass an idea on. We can change our minds. We can go, I don't want to kill it. I don't want to screw it.
Right.
I want to
Right.
have a conversation with it.
Yeah.
Oh, it's a hedgehog. I can't have a conversation with it. We have the power to change our minds. And in a cult group, the mind is the leader. You don't
Yeah.
have a
Yeah.
mind. You're not meant to think.
It's
You're
the
just finding
group.
ways of conforming and complying
Yeah.
with
It's
the.
the group think. Yeah. The group think. I mean, absolutely. It's in a similar way. I think they had, there's this, and again, I haven't studied it, but the James Webb telescope out there in space is completely rewriting the way we look at the whole cosmos
They've found tiny
now.
original
Yeah.
galaxies now that have no black hole at the center. So a
Yeah.
whole cosmological theory has gone. These are things
Right.
that were, created 300 million years
Right.
after the Big Bang. And they're tiny little things. You go, we're thinking what? And the
Yeah.
whole science of, when I look at dark energy, dark matter,
Right.
string theory, none of these things that I understand, let's be honest
Right.
about it. But I look at it and go, phlogiston. There was this time where we didn't have an explanation. So
Yeah.
when you burn something, what's coming off it is phlogiston. And people
Yeah.
take the mickey out of that. That was those stupid people. They didn't realize there were bacteria or what have you. And then we quite charmingly say, well, 80% of the matter of the universe is missing. Well, that means there must be dark matter. Oh, that doesn't explain it all. That means there must be dark energy.
Yeah.
Oh, tell you what, mathematically, there must be parallel universes. And multiverse theory at its worst got to the point where there was a belief that every time an electron moved in its shell, it created a new universe.
Oh my
It's
goodness.
it's infinite. Every time a
Yeah.
decision is made
Right.
where there is a
Right.
possible other decision. Now we're a bit more restricted. And finally, this year, some big challenges. I've never liked multiverse. It's always seemed just silly to me. It's like a surreal
Yeah.
fairy tale. And the thought of there being billions of other John Ataks is just, it's too horrible. To one is enough, I think.
Yeah, well, but I mean, I think that the lesson to take away is it's important to be curious. It's also important to be comfortable with saying I don't know,
Mm.
you know,
Yeah, it's so
and
hard until you're
yeah,
about
yeah.
60 years old.
It's amazing. That simple statement to me usually demonstrates to me when I'm analyzing, like looking at someone else, of whether, I think they're bright or not, intelligent. Because if they're quick to say, I don't know, then I really recognize they're probably someone I could relate to. If they're coming off with the know-it-all type of thing, they got the answer to everything, I'm a little bit skeptical at that point because I've fallen into that pattern myself when I've thought I've known something so well. I've been wrong many times. And just like I said earlier, you might just find out new information that if nothing else, at least creates a nuance that is something that I hadn't seen before. So I think it's important to stay curious, stay comfortable in the I don't know, and recognize that it's not a great thing to pursue trying to figure it all out because it's just overwhelming with the cosmos and the world that we live in and just getting through life all the time. This kind of pull towards spirituality, sometimes like, oh, if you go into this certain way of thought, everything's going to make sense. It's like, well, that's a bill of goods I signed up for that did not work out too well. But I see the temptation because that sounds more stable. That sounds something that, sounds more concrete. But the truth is, I just don't think life is like that. It's a constant change, moving, things are evolving, and you just have to be kind of open-minded and be ready to keep taking in the information as it comes in and stop thinking that I made a decision on this is the way it is. It's what they call confirmation bias, right?
Mm.
I'm only going to take in information that supports my point of view. That's not going to do you much good. But in a lot of these groups and ways of thought, they only take in the information that supports their premise, and that's not being, very accurate the way the world works.
Yeah, and you come to this, let's be honest about this. The religions of the world, as they are, all come from the Bronze Age. They come from the Bronze Age. Now,
Mm,
if we can keep thinking forward and go, yeah, there are brilliant ideas in Aristotle, Plato. The bit about putting babies on the hillside in Plato, I'm not so keen on. And killing all the poets, that's a bit nasty, but
yeah.
they can be bloody annoying poets. In the Gospels, in the Old Testament, in the Quran, in the Sufi teachings, in the Zen teachings, you can find brilliant and wonderful things, but they're coming out of the Bronze Age. And if the Dalai Lama, who has had his problems taking money from Keith Raniere and
Right. Right.
Osahara, the head of Shinrikyo, $3.25 million in all from those two. That's not so good, but he has got a whole community to feed somehow. But nonetheless, he caused quite a stir 30 years ago by saying that if he found that science disproved something within the Buddha Dharma, he would reject the Buddha Dharma, that part of it.
Oh,
And there was
wow.
outrage throughout the Buddhist world. How could you do that? And you go, well, but that's what the Buddha Dharma is. It's
Right.
seek the truth. The Buddha is you've got the Kalama Sutta, which is, I have actually published the Alexander David Neal misquotation of it myself. And it's in one of my books and I apologize for that. But it doesn't quite say what she says it says. But that's
Yeah.
basically don't listen to somebody because they're your parent. Don't listen to somebody because they're your teacher. Don't listen to somebody because a demon whispers in your ear. Don't listen to saints. Don't listen to angels. Don't listen to the Buddha.
Yeah.
Work it out for yourself. Check things. Always check things. And
Yeah.
and that that concept of saying, I won't be able to think for myself as long as I'm just parroting what other people think.
Yeah.
And what are the ethical ramifications of what I'm doing? Will it be good? I mean, I frequently quote it, with kindness as your king, you will reach heaven before you reach your end. It's Dave Matthews. And
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's
yeah,
beautiful.
and it's
Yeah.
where I've come to live instead of any dream of paradise or reincarnation or spiritual existence. And I kind of go, well, me includes this. This is
Right.
me. So does the spirit have a mind? Does the mind inhabit the brain? Is the brain inevitably connected to the body? Is the body permeable? Can things get through the skin? Yes, they can.
Yeah, sure can.
Am I therefore a process? And if I took parts of this away, the Chinese have this idea of 5 souls in the body and they all separate and go their own separate ways. How many of these things am I? What am I meant to be? It doesn't actually matter because myself, as I conceive myself in the delusion of being a self,
Right.
is the point where I am. And it's not divided into bits. You know, I haven't got a demon on my shoulder, as the anthroposophists have it, telling me
Yeah.
what to do. Carlos Santana, he was doing so well. He left the Sri Chinmoy cult after, I think, 18 years. And he was liberated and he smoked dope again. And he was really happy. And he did a South Bank show, it was, in this country. And he was saying, yeah, all of the great music of the 60s, it comes out of LSD, man, you know, and you're going, yeah, tell them about that, tell them about that. And he goes, and when I'm in
Yeah.
trouble, I have this little guy on my shoulder who tells me, no, don't tell them that. Don't tell them the consequence of taking the drugs, you know. Tell them how
Oh my
much fun it
goodness.
was and how great the music was that came out of it. Yeah. I'd like to pick up on a phrase that you used, which whenever it's used, I have to pick up on it, and that's the survival of the fittest.
Yeah.
And having just written a book which features the Nazis,
Yeah.
they were social Darwinists who believed in the survival of the fittest. And
Right.
the little thing I give in there is that let's look at fitness. There's a fire blazing towards a cliff, and trapped in the fire, being pushed towards the cliff, there's a lion, there's a monkey, and there's a mouse. Now, which of them is fittest to survive? The mouse can go through a crack in the rocks. The monkey can climb the rocks. The lion is the least fitted to survive. The Nazis, and Darwin, it's not Darwin's phrase, it was Spencer, Herbert Spencer, who came up with the phrase. And at first, Darwin said, oh, don't like the sound of that. And then the idiot said, yeah, let's talk about the survival of the fittest. Well,
Right.
it's it's a tautology. What is fitted to survive in that environment
Well,
will
right.
survive in that
Exactly. All
environment,
of
not the
it.
strongest or the biggest or the hardest, as the Nazis got it.
Yeah.
And they
Right.
lasted 12 years on that philosophy and caused, well, 50 million deaths and all.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
and another thing was that in Scientology, it was make it go right. You've got this sort of, you made it go right. And you've got this amazing contradiction, which is they talk about tone 40. And tone
Mm.
40 is pure intentional willpower. You make events occur simply by demanding in your mind that they occur, what's called a postulate. And it's called tone 40 because of Ron Hubbard's emotional tone scale. And it used to be the highest point, tone 40, which was serenity of beingness. Serenity. And when you're in this
Right.
state of serenity, you just intend things like any good magician and they'll happen. You know, you want a banana smoothie, it's in your hand, you know, bang, there it is. It's appeared out of nowhere. But when you actually see it in Scientology, what tone 40 means is bullying somebody to the point where they do
Where they
what you,
capitulate.
yeah.
Right.
And it always involves a lot of shouting and spitting.
Oh,
So
wow.
that kind of contradiction, which is exactly the point you came in on, that you're training people and they'll get it, at which point they'll leave and go and start exploiting other people using these techniques, or
Right.
they'll get it, at which point they'll leave and start showing the world what these
Yeah.
techniques are actually
Right.
doing.
Right. Actually, that was the other thing I wrote down from the program is the guy said when the death of the Yogi Bhajan really caused a lot of disillusionment within the community, and that did cause an exodus. The people who had moral standards that they couldn't ever overlook, they're gone. You know, so the people that realize there's a lot of contradictions, and what is left, it's the true believers who can't see any fault in anything that the leader did. And these are people who either are likely compromised by illegal or illicit activities, right? So you're basically, you have events that happen in these groups, and I certainly know this happened in our group where there's a fracture within the group, and then it's like who aligns themselves with what, and who's willing to see what's really going on versus
follow the shoe, follow the
yeah,
board.
exactly. Because to maintain the narrative, and usually it's very ego based. Like, if you don't, and we've talked about this a lot ourselves, that if you don't have the humility to admit to yourself that you basically got conned on some level and taken advantage of, you have to maintain the narrative that everything I got exposed to was true and righteous and good. I just have to figure a way to make it work.
The
And of
universe is
course,
teaching me its secrets by
exactly. This is
abusing
just
me in
another
this way.
step on my this is another step on my spiritual path.
Yeah.
And you just can't swallow the pill of like, nope, I got taken, I got conned, I got lied to, I got manipulated. And I've watched that happen within my group. People, it's now 40 years out, still holding on to that narrative because they just won't let go of the fact that not only did they experience abuse, but then they learned and talked about and committed abuse towards others. So all of it they just run from, and it's tragic. To me, it's the most tragic part of the story that I tell, because our group was never very large. Probably at most 100 people coming and going over the 15 years that were really within the inner circle, so to speak. And less than half a dozen can really talk about it as a cult and know what that means, and the rest just run from it or just are still true believers, so to speak, loyalists. And it's absolutely tragic.
There's a principle in neurology, Gerald Edelman, who won a Nobel Prize, said in the brain, what fires, wires. So we create habitual pathways. We create ways of believing and behaving. I mean, one of the things I've really pushed for, and I've got nowhere with it. I set up a group in 1993. I got 12 ex-members in the room with more than 200 years experience of Scientology between us. And I said, we're going to go around from my left because I'm the authority and I don't want to be. So we go, person to my left will start, and they say when they used a Scientology principle and how they used it. And we're going to start with the 8 dynamics. The idea that survival is the basic principle of existence. Duh, existence is the basic principle of existence. Thanks for that one, Ron. And there's a survival for yourself, the first dynamic, survival through sex and with your family, the second dynamic, survival through groups, the third dynamic, survival as mankind, the fourth dynamic, survival as matter, energy, space and time, survival as spirits, survival as life forms, other animals and what have you, plants, and God, the 8th dynamic. So you're told you basically assign a vote to each of these things and you go around, you check whether to do something or not.
Right.
And so I thought, there are 12 of us in the room. There'll be some interesting stories. So the first guy said, never actually used it. And the second guy said, well, I never used it. Went the whole circle. None of us had ever tried to apply what is considered to be a fundamental principle of Scientology. And then I was able to deconstruct it and say, well, you get one vote, 7.5 billion people get one vote. And if you believe in God, then you can forget the other 7 votes. You have to do what God wants, because otherwise you are stuffed. Let's face it. So it's a nonsense. But my hope was I knew I couldn't be in the room because I'd be explaining everything to people, and this is not the point. And this idea of trying to set up groups of ex-members to ask the truth question, as my friend Yosurgud used to put it, he said, why don't sociologists ask the truth question? Why don't they say, is what's being taught true? Why don't they ever do that? Oh, people have got a right to believe what they want. The Earth's flat.
Yeah.
So, okay, right. Well, here's the ring of Antarctica. There's the Arctic in the middle. And here are aeroplane timetables. How do you go with the flat Earth after that? It can't work. Try it sometime, children at home. Just get a flat Earth map and look at how long it takes to fly from Argentina to Britain or what have you, and you'll find that it has to be a globe or spheric, pretty much spherical.
Yeah. Right.
But that's sort of getting into a systematic way of thinking. What fires wires? So these people, your friends and my friends who retain their Scientology beliefs, it doesn't just evaporate. So the idea is, if you talk about the principles and you say, well, I've decided that Ron Hubbard's ideas about communication are good, because you can reason with it. And what I
Right.
find happens is, just get two or more people together. And by the way, there was a Scientology agent in that bunch of 12 who was reporting it all. Never mind. Shout out to Charlie Poulter if you're out there, Charlie. We know who you are. Real name Cyril. If you talk about things, try and
Mm.
explain them to somebody who's, say what you believe to somebody who doesn't know anything about it, and explain it. You will start finding that it doesn't make sense.
Oh
And
yeah, I bet. Yeah.
that's so the thing is, being able to look at modern insight. We have discovered a great deal more about the world than was known at the time of Abraham, Moses, Jesus, the Buddha, or Muhammad, the blessed prophet.
Yeah.
We know a lot more about the world. And taking that and going to the new age and saying, oh, it's about quantum entanglement of our souls. It's like, no, understand what quantum entanglement is first, please. And take a view that deconstructing Aryan race theory, which has been a central part of the book that I'm writing, where did it come from? Where did this crazy idea come from? And something that I've gone and read the expert texts that I could manage in the last year, and to find out that nobody has written, I've written a chapter about it, how the Nazis disproved Aryan race theory. They absolutely disproved it. They did hundreds of thousands of experiments and horrific things, measuring calf muscles and blood types and fingerprints and ears and skull
Right.
sizes. That was the big one from the 19th century. And at the end of it, they couldn't distinguish between any racial types. So what they had called the Mediterranean type couldn't be separated from the Nordic type. They found in one study that 11.4%, I think it is, of the Jews that they examined had blue eyes, light skin, and fair hair.
Right.
Some Jews, of course, have black skin. You get this point where, and Hitler himself, and this is really not publicized, towards the end of his life, he made a statement in the last weeks that he'd understood that the Jews, they were culture, they were not a racial type. He
Wow.
understood that. And they'd produced the evidence that said, this is nonsense. Now, of course, we have genetics, which
Yeah.
absolutely blows it away completely.
Wow.
But you go down to a neo-Nazi and say, so you're an
Yeah.
Aryan. I was talking to somebody who grew up in a neo-Nazi American household, and he told me that, and I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, he told me that his mother was actually defected from the USSR. And I said, but so your dad thinks she's an Aryan? She's a Slav. I'm sorry, read Mein Kampf. The Slavs are, Slav means slave. Himmler gave an order to kill 30 million Slavs to replace them. Replacement theory, there it is, to replace them with German Aryan settlements. And
Wow.
they very nearly achieved that target. It's the top estimate at the moment is they killed 27 million people. And
So
it's an order to the Waffen SS and the Allgemeine SS from Himmler. It would go on about whether the Holocaust happened or not. It happened. It happened to the Slavs, to the Romani, to the blacks, to the communists, to the Jews, and to the Jehovah's Witnesses, and to the homosexuals, and to the schizophrenics, and all of these categories of people. And contemporary white supremacists, white nationalists as they call themselves, have this delusion that having white skin makes you Aryan. It's like, no, it doesn't.
mm,
That's not even a significant aspect. It's a way of telling that you're not Aryan if you don't. But a construction of that type of belief is then taken on board. Our friend Rachel Bernstein told me that she was told this story about some white nationalists driving through a native reservation and
mm.
screaming, "Go home!" And the people are there, and you're going, "All right,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you're a
They're home.
moron."
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Exactly.
home.
Yeah.
I want some homeland security. Leave me alone. But just that very essential thing that beliefs lead to behaviors, that you start your good and evil comes from what you think is it's okay to kill people because they've eaten pork. Why
Right.
not?
Right.
It's okay to kill people because, I don't know, they got big earlobes. Genetically, those differentiations aren't there. But these groups make these determinations, which are moral determinations. And that has become the rules, that you can feel like you're a good boy or a bad boy or a good girl
Yeah.
or a bad girl or a good transgender person or a bad transgender person, because you're now, you eat custard every day as the guru said you should, or
Yeah.
like Ron Hubbard, you smoke 100 cigarettes a day in the noble cause of curing cancer. Man passes misery on to man. It rises like a coastal shelf. And that's what we see. I mean, returning to Breath of Fire, I got through the first episode and I was really impressed. As you
Yeah.
say, it wasn't as bad as Wild Wild Country, where you get no
Yeah.
idea what happened to the followers.
Exactly,
It's just
exactly.
the
And we can talk about it more once you've seen the whole thing, because I think,
Mm.
they raise some great points. They just, like I said, personally, they just lean in too much to I mean, we've seen the cult leader stuff so many times over, and we know these are bad actors, so to speak. But they do a nice job of humanizing the survivors, and I think they raise some really important points about the dynamics. And as we talked about here, why people rise up in the ranks and why others don't. That's, I think, something really worth considering. But that's a topic that's not really talked about that much.
Yeah, and I mean, she says some great things. She says you can have a 13th dimension orgasm.
There you go. There you
Sounds pretty
go.
good.
I mean, so yeah.
And you
No,
find out that among their business interests, and Bajaj was the CEO of all, including
yeah.
Yogi Tea, is a company called AKEL, AKEL, and they provide security to the United States government.
Wow.
And so you've got this. On the one hand, they're buying their guns from the Moonies,
Oh, geez. Yeah, exactly. I know
and
the movies have so many hooks into so many different,
oh,
businesses. It's crazy.
yeah.
My goodness.
But I'm sure that in the next few weeks everything will be sorted out. That Krishna will
Yeah.
return to Earth with
There we
his
go.
little
There we go.
play his little flute, and we will all follow him like a Pied Piper.
Well, it's always good to chat with you, John.
It's
And
always such fun. Yeah, it's always
yeah,
great to see
and
you.
I look
you.
forward to the next time.
Yeah, and you must come over again soon. Um,
Yes, I'm hoping to very, very, very soon.
so
All right.
let's. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks
Thank
to
you, everybody.
everybody, and write
Yep.
some comments. Hoyt may answer them.
Okay, cheers.
Sometimes I do as well. It has been known. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. Take care, John.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.